In the small town of Cedar Grove, Alabama, where red dirt roads stretch farther than the eye can see, and the air smells like rain and soil, lived a man named Samuel Carter, a black farmer, born and raised on the same patch of land his grandfather once tilled with his bare hands. For Samuel, the land wasn't just property, it was family. Every tree, every stone, every fence post held a memory. His father used to say, "This soil remembers our blood, boy. You treat it right, it'll treat you right." And Samuel did. For 40 years, he worked the earth with love, planting cotton, corn, and soybeans, raising a few cows, and taking care of his elderly mother and his 2 children. But times were changing. The world outside Cedar Grove was moving fast. New technology, new rules, and new corporations swallowing small farms one by one. Samuel wasn't afraid of hard work, but no matter how much he worked, it never seemed enough. Prices fell, machinery broke, the bank called every month. And then came the drought. For 2 years straight, the rains didn't come. Cracked soil, dying crops, and empty barns became Samuel's reality. He prayed, he worked, and he held on to hope. Until the letter came. The letter was from Denton Industries, a billion-dollar agricultural company owned by one of the richest men in America, Richard Denton. They claimed Samuel's 40-acre property was sitting on land that belonged to them. A surveying error, they said. He had 30 days to vacate or face legal action. Samuel stared at that paper like it was a death sentence. He couldn't believe it. His family had owned this land for over 90 years. Every generation buried their loved ones under the big oak tree by the pond. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, the letter in his hands, his mother humming an old gospel tune in the background. He whispered, "Mama, they're trying to take our home." She stopped singing, looked him straight in the eyes. "Then you fight, son. You fight like your daddy did, like his daddy before him." The next morning, Samuel put on his old boots, got in his dusty pickup, and drove to the county courthouse. He couldn't afford a lawyer, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He filed a case against Denton Industries, a small farmer versus a billionaire corporation. Everyone in town laughed when they heard, "Sam Carter taking on Richard Denton? That's like an ant suing a bulldozer." But Samuel didn't care. He knew what was right. Weeks turned into months. He showed up to every hearing, carrying a folder of old deeds, photographs, and handwritten letters, proof of ownership passed down through generations. But the billionaire's lawyers buried him in paperwork and technical language he could barely understand. Still, Samuel never missed a single court date, even when he sold his last cow to pay for gas, even when his old truck broke down and he had to walk 5 miles in the rain. He showed up every single time. Word began to spread. The black farmer who took on the billionaire. News reporters came. Cameras showed up. Some called him brave. Others called him foolish. But deep down, Samuel didn't care about fame or pride. He just wanted justice. He wanted his children to grow up knowing their family name meant something. Then came the worst day. A month before the final hearing, Samuel returned home to find a bulldozer on his land tearing down the old barn. Workers said they were clearing company property. He yelled, cried, begged them to stop. But they didn't listen. His mother stood on the porch, holding the family Bible, tears streaming down her face. That night, she fell sick, heartbroken. Samuel sat by her bedside, holding her frail hand. "Mama," he whispered, "I promise I'll get our land back." She smiled weakly. "Then you already won, baby, 'cause you still got fight left in you." The next morning, she was gone. They buried her under that oak tree, the same one Denton Industries wanted to destroy for their new factory. As the preacher said the final prayer, Samuel looked at the horizon, tears rolling down his dusty cheeks. And in that moment, something inside him changed. The fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that was left was faith. He looked up and said quietly, "Lord, they can take everything I got, but not my will to fight." That night, Samuel went back to the courthouse, and there, in the dim light of the clerk's office, he handed over the last paper he could file, an appeal that would bring the case before a federal judge. Everyone said it was hopeless, but destiny had other plans. Because far away, in a high-rise office overlooking Manhattan, Richard Denton, the billionaire himself, was about to read a news article that would change his life forever. The Billionaire's Past and the Unexpected Connection. Richard Denton sat behind his polished mahogany desk, staring at the glowing headline on his tablet. Black Farmer Takes Billionaire to Court, a David versus Goliath battle in Alabama. He scrolled through the article, reading about Samuel Carter, the man whose small farm was standing between Denton Industries and their new mega development. A man with worn-out boots, hands calloused by decades of labor, and eyes that refused to bend under pressure. Richard leaned back in his chair, the city lights reflecting off his gold cufflinks. He had faced tough business battles before, mergers, lawsuits, bankruptcies, but something about this story made him pause. For Richard, life had always been about control, power, and results. He built his empire from scratch, or so he liked to tell people, but the truth was more complicated. Richard wasn't born into wealth. He had grown up in a small town much like Cedar Grove. His father, a factory worker, died when Richard was 12, leaving him and his younger sister to fend for themselves. He remembered nights lying awake, stomach empty, listening to the rain beat against the broken roof of their old house. He had promised himself that he would never be powerless again, and he wasn't, not anymore. He became ruthless, ambitious, and above all, untouchable. But that ambition came at a cost. He lost friends, relationships, and even a sense of empathy along the way. And now, looking at Samuel Carter, a man fighting with everything he had, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years. A flicker of guilt. Richard's secretary, always efficient, always precise, had left a note on his desk. "Mr. Denton, this farmer may be a problem. Legal team recommends immediate action." Richard looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the skyline. The city below gleamed with opportunity and wealth. Yet in that moment, all he could see was a young boy like him, sitting hungry in a small town, fighting for dignity. He closed his eyes. Richard Denton had forgotten what it was like to hope when the odds were stacked against you. The next day, something unusual happened. Richard asked his assistant to connect him directly with the farmer's legal counsel. The lawyers were shocked. He didn't do negotiations lightly. He was known for crushing opposition. But Richard wasn't calling to intimidate. He was calling to listen. Samuel picked up the call, wary and exhausted. "Hello?" said Samuel. "Mr. Carter?" Richard's voice came through, calm, surprisingly gentle. "I've been following your case. I wanted to hear your side directly." Samuel froze. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The billionaire himself calling him? I don't understand. Why would you care?" Richard sighed, a human sound that had been missing in his life for years. "Because I remember being powerless, and I see something in you.
that I lost a long time ago." Over the next hour, Samuel told Richard about his farm, about his family, and about the land that had been in their family for generations. He spoke about his late mother, the drought, the barn, and the fear of losing everything. His voice cracked at times, but his spirit remained unbroken. Richard listened, not as a businessman, not as a billionaire, but as a man who remembered what it was like to dream against impossible odds. And then something extraordinary happened. Richard made a promise. "I don't know if I can undo everything immediately, but I can help. I want to make sure your family keeps this land. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, legally, financially, however you need me." Samuel couldn't speak. His hands trembled. He had fought so hard, expecting only cold indifference, maybe even humiliation. But what he heard was compassion. Richard continued, his voice softer now. "I want you to know, Samuel, I respect you, and I want to make this right. Not because I have to, but because it's the right thing to do." Samuel's eyes welled up. He remembered his mother's words, "Fight, son, fight, like your daddy did." And now, fighting had led him to something he never imagined, an ally in the very man trying to take his land. The story of a black farmer and a billionaire was no longer about conflict alone. It was about understanding, empathy, and the power of humanity to change even the hardest hearts. Richard Denton wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a man remembering the value of kindness, of integrity, and of making a difference. And Samuel Carter, tired but unbroken, realized something too. Sometimes the hardest battles didn't just test your strength, they revealed the humanity hidden in others. The stage was set. The court battle would continue, yes, but the war had changed. It was no longer just about land. It was about redemption, justice, and the beginning of a story that would touch thousands of lives.
The courtroom battle and the emotional turning point. The morning of the final hearing arrived like a storm rolling over Cedar Grove. Samuel Carter's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped into the courthouse, dusty boots echoing against polished marble floors. His lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Elena Brooks, gave him a reassuring nod. "You've got this, Sam. Just speak your truth," she whispered. Samuel adjusted his tie, a hand-me-down from his father, and walked into the courtroom where Denton Industries' team of powerhouse lawyers waited like predators. And in the back, Richard Denton watched silently. No smug smirk, only a quiet presence that made Samuel pause. The judge, an older man with years of experience etched in the lines of his face, looked down from the bench. "Case Carter versus Denton Industries. We are here to determine rightful ownership of the disputed 40 acres in Cedar Grove." Samuel's knees trembled, but his voice stayed steady. "My name is Samuel Carter. This land isn't just dirt and fences. It's my family's home, my ancestors' labor, my children's future. We didn't inherit a title from a corporation. We inherited love, sweat, and sacrifice." He held up photographs, faded but precious, his father plowing the field, his mother teaching him how to plant corn, his late mother standing proudly by the old barn. "This land tells our story, and no lawsuit can erase generations of devotion." The courtroom murmured. Even some of Denton's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Richard Denton rose, stepping forward. His voice was calm, almost unrecognizable to those who only knew him as ruthless. "Your Honor, I came here to challenge Mr. Carter because it is the company's property.
But after reviewing the facts, listening to him, and understanding the history, I realized that some things are more valuable than profit." Gasps echoed through the room. Samuel froze. Could this really be happening? Richard continued, "I want to ensure this family keeps their land, not because it benefits me, but because it's the right thing to do." Samuel blinked, fighting tears. He never expected a billionaire to take such a step. It felt surreal. Justice wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about humanity triumphing over greed. But Denton Industries' lawyers weren't ready to give up. They presented mountains of paperwork, maps, and legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate. Samuel could barely understand it all. His hands shook, his voice wavered. Yet Elena Brooks whispered firmly, "Speak from your heart, Sam. The truth is stronger than any contract." So Samuel did. He spoke of his father, who had taught him resilience. He spoke of his late mother, who had shown him love without expectation. He spoke of his children, who deserved a chance to play under the same trees their great-grandparents had planted. Every word, every pause carried pain, love, and hope. Even the judge leaned forward, captivated by the authenticity of a man who had nothing left to lose, but everything worth keeping. And then, in a moment that seemed suspended in time, the courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in quiet awe. The power of truth had pierced the veil of money and authority. Richard Denton walked to Samuel's side. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he whispered, "You did it. You fought for what matters, and you've won something no money can buy." Tears streamed down Samuel's face as he looked around the courtroom, his neighbors, reporters, and friends, and even some of Denton's employees, all watching in disbelief. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady, resolute. "After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and considering the arguments, the court rules in favor of Samuel Carter. The 40-acre property shall remain in his family's ownership. Denton Industries is ordered to cease all claims immediately." Samuel sank into the wooden bench, his knees trembling. He looked at the oak tree outside the courthouse window and thought of his mother. "We did it, Mama," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Richard Denton shook his head in disbelief, then smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I underestimated you," he said softly. "You've reminded me what life is really about." Outside, a crowd had gathered, neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. When Samuel stepped out, people cheered, cameras flashed, children ran to hug him. Samuel looked around and realized the fight wasn't just his anymore. It had become a story of hope for everyone who believed that courage and integrity could triumph against all odds. And in that moment, Samuel made a silent promise. He would never take this victory for granted. He would nurture the land, care for his family, and honor his ancestors, all while remembering the lesson that justice can be amplified by compassion. And as for Richard Denton, something had changed too. The billionaire returned to his office, looking out over the skyline. He had lost the battle for dominance, but he had gained something far more valuable, a renewed sense of humanity, humility, and purpose. Because sometimes the richest person in the world isn't measured by money, but by the courage to do the right thing. And sometimes the smallest person, a black farmer in worn-out boots, can teach the world a lesson about heart, dignity, and unbreakable spirit.
Fields Samuel Carter had fought so fiercely to protect. For the first time in months, the farm didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home again. Samuel walked through the rows of corn, hand brushing over the stalks, as if greeting old friends. His children ran through the fields, laughing, kicking up dust, their voices carrying across the land like a hymn of hope. He stopped by the old oak tree, the one that had stood for generations, witnessing births, deaths, and now victory. Samuel knelt and placed his hand on the weathered bark. "Mom, we made it. We kept it." The fight had taken everything he could give, his sleep, his energy, and at times his faith, but the land was safe, and with it, the memory of those who had loved it before him. Word spread quickly. Samuel Carter had won. And the story didn't just stay in Cedar Grove. News outlets, social media, and even national TV covered the tale. A black farmer taking on a billionaire and winning. But this wasn't just about headlines. It was about change, compassion, and the extraordinary power of courage.